We're ready to begin.
Okay, welcome to the forum for the candidates running for mayor of Evanston. This forum is sponsored by the Evanston League of Women Voters and the Evanston Public Library. My name is Jennifer O'Neill, and I have the honor of serving as president of the Evanston League this year. The League of Women Voters is a national, nonpartisan political organization dedicated to promoting the active and informed participation of citizens in government. The League takes positions on issues, but neither endorses nor opposes any candidate for public office. In addition to the questions from League members and community partners, the public was invited to submit questions for this forum. The deadline for questions was 48 hours prior to the event. The League has reviewed the questions for appropriateness for the office, to ensure that questions are directed to all candidates, and to eliminate duplication. This forum is being recorded and will be available on demand on YouTube with links to the video on the League website. So, the candidates for mayor of Evanston are Daniel Biss, Lori Keenan, and Sebastian Knowles. The moderator today is Jan Flappen of Chicago. Jan is a past president of the League of Women Voters of Chicago, as well as the League of Women Voters of Illinois. She has also served 2 terms as a board member of the National League. She's a former teacher and executive director of a small social service agency. So Jan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to take a minute to summarize the rules and format. As moderator, I'll enforce the time limits and may interrupt to enforce the ground rules and format agreed to by the candidates. Candidates will make opening statements of up to 2 minutes. Then each candidate will have up to 90 seconds to respond to each question. I'll call on candidates to respond in rotating order. The closing statements are also limited to 90 seconds. The opening and closing statements and responses to questions will be timed. A League member will keep time, and all candidates and I can see the countdown display on our screens. Candidates are not allowed to use visual aids for display. We'll begin with the opening statements of no more than 2 minutes. They'll be in alphabetical order by last name. Candidates have been asked to provide their qualifications and the top 2 priorities for the next 4 years. Candidate Biss, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks to the League and the library for putting on this forum. I've always found that these forums put on by the League are kind of the gold standard for public discourse. And I have to especially thank the League for the remarkable advocacy on so many important issues over the years. Sometimes I feel like if the state of Illinois and the city of Evanston listened to the League more, we'd be in a better position than we are today. My name is Daniel Biss. I'm running for mayor of Evanston. I live on Central Street with my wife, Karen, who teaches history at National Louis. Our 2 kids are in 5th and 7th grade at Willard and Haven. And I spent 8 years of the last decade serving in the Illinois General Assembly, both in the House and the Senate, working on a number of issues around budget and tax fairness, civil rights, reproductive freedom, LGBT rights, political reform, and more. And during the course of that time, learned a lot, accomplished a lot, made some mistakes that I learned from as well, and really came to understand what it takes to put together a diverse coalition in a complex situation to advance legislation and improve lives for people in our community. I also learned a lot about how state and municipal government can come together to improve the quality of life of people in our community. I'm running for mayor because we are in a critical moment, especially, of course, because of the coronavirus pandemic that has caused terrible human consequences. We've lost over 100 Evanstonians and are suffering from other physical health consequences, mental health consequences, and economic consequences as a result of the shutdown, but also because we are now experiencing a long overdue reckoning on questions of racial justice, police brutality, housing, and segregation. And there's an incredible opportunity for our city, a progressive community, to lead the way on these issues. I'm excited to bring my experience and progressive values to bear to those problems. I'm excited for today's discussion, and I very much appreciate everyone's interest in the race for mayor and in building a better community.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
Hi, thank you to the League and also to Evanston Public Library for hosting, and to Judy and Jennifer for having us today. The last time I was involved with the League was on another important issue in town around Harley Clark. So I appreciate the very important work that you do in informing the voters on the issues in town. That initiative got 80% of the vote. So I think something that we were all doing was right in that instance. Thanks for having me here today. My name is Lori Keenan, and I'm running for mayor of Evanston. My husband and I have raised our 3 children here in town. I live in the 7th ward, and they have gone to all of the public schools, Kingsley, Haven, and ETHS. In the 22 years that I've lived in Evanston, I have been involved in a number of local issues because I have always been involved in our community and what's important to the people who live here in Evanston. I think we're going to hear a lot today from 3 candidates who are going to have very similar views about a lot of these types of things. I think the thing that distinguishes me from the other 2 candidates is that I have the actual Evanston experience, that I have built a coalition and I have built consensus and I have gotten things done in town. I've also worked with local municipal government and with state government on issues that were important to Evanston voters. 10 years ago, I helped to save the branch libraries, and I raised money to keep the branches open. We built an all-volunteer library. I was a founding member of the Deja Coleman Foundation, which provided scholarships and direction for youth in Evanston, and more recently to help to save a local landmark that was threatened with demolition by a private interest. So I've been involved in the issues, and I've been really entrenched and enmeshed with the Evanston community for the 22 years that I've been involved. And I hope that you'll listen today, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Candidate Knowles.
First off, I want to say thank you to the Evanston League of Women Voters and the Evanston Public Library. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to talk with you all this afternoon. My name is Sebastian All. I'm 20 years old. I'm currently a student at Purdue University, majoring in accounting and political science. I'm a lifetime resident of Evanston, and for the past 6 years, I have worked in the Evanston Parks and Recreation Department, 2 of which I've worked in an administrative capacity, working directly with local government officials. And in my capacity, working for the Parks and Recreation Department, I focused on equity-driven programs and working with youth to enhance their experience, their Evanston experience overall, which is where the forefront of our campaign has really been brought to, transforming Evanston government and Evanston as a whole into a transparent and equitable government. As soon as I started my campaign, we noticed that one of the chief issues here in Evanston was transparency. And we focused on that issue among many others, going door to door, establishing communication with residents, ensuring that their issues and their problems are heard. And taking a look at all of our programs and establishing a lens of equity when we're dealing with various issues from climate change, affordable housing, racial equity, police reform, and so much more. So I look to bring my experience from working in the Evanston Parks and Recreation Department as a leader in that position and bringing that to the city of Evanston, bringing new and invigorating ideas to the city to bring solutions to the table that might not have been thought of before. So I'm very excited to talk with you all and answer any questions you all have. So I can't wait to get into it.
Thank you. Now we're going to go to the questions. Each candidate will have 90 seconds, and every candidate will answer every question. And we are going to start with candidate Keenan. First question: what will you do to reach out to all residents and ensure that all voices will be heard on important issues?
Well, I guess I'll go back to my original playbook for Evanston. This is what I've done for 22 years in town. And on issues that aren't just in my ward, but across Evanston, I've reached out to different communities and built real consensus with the citizens. Everything from environmental racism in the 5th ward, to building a library in the 3rd ward, to really helping with high school kids in that community. So I would go back to my community activism. I would certainly also tap into my professional line of work, which is public relations and marketing. I think we need better communication in town and a way to reach out to the people that have previously been disenfranchised. I think Zoom has provided a great forum for that. I think we're going to go back to a lot of models pre-COVID, but I think that this has provided us an opportunity to really hear from voices that we might not otherwise have heard from. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
So this was an issue that we took in the beginning of our campaign, and seeing that one of the residents' chief concerns was not being able to talk to an elected official. And prior to even me running for office, I was part of the Black Male Alliance, where we went into marginalized communities where we saw an uptick of gang and gun violence. And we went in, we talked to residents in the community, had those meaningful conversations and said, look, we're here for you in anything that you need. And that's exactly what I intend to do once going into office. I pledged at the beginning of my campaign to hold weekly town hall meetings where residents can voice concerns that they have about government, or just come in and chat and have those conversations. And then I would then relay any information to city council, city staff to try to better some of our programs and institutions we have in Evanston. And this is not a job that I alone can perform. Obviously, it takes the work of individuals throughout the city. So I would invite any alderman, any city staff who would be interested in coming with me to talk to the community on a weekly basis, have those conversations and build trust between community members and local government.
Thank you. Candidate Biss.
Thanks for the question. You know, we have a blessing in Evanston, which is there's an incredibly engaged community. Lots of people want to make their voices heard and have the tools and bandwidth and social capital to in fact make their voices heard. And sometimes in that situation, governments make the mistake of assuming that because they're hearing from a lot of people, that means they're hearing from enough people. Well, that's not true. There's a lot of people whose voices aren't heard. And so we need to make sure that we're reaching out in every neighborhood, in every community, and listening to people proactively before decisions are made, while policies are developed, and listening in a way that they see they're being heard, right? Because the most important tool to get more citizen engagement is for residents to understand visibly that when they share their opinion, it matters. And I go back to my experience in the legislature where we had tons of public meetings. I remember once telling one of my colleagues in the legislature about all the different town hall meetings we were having on different subjects. And she said to me, Daniel, you couldn't pay me to have all that, do all those different meetings. And I said, well, I think we are actually. I think that's the fundamental responsibility of a public official, not only to give information, but to take information and to learn and grow and evolve. And I think people who spent time talking with me when I was in the legislature, even people who disagreed with me strongly, would tell you that I learned and grew and took their input seriously. And when that's the signal coming out of the government, people are much quicker then to step up and participate.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles, you will have first chance at the second question. What do you think the city should be doing in the first years of your term to repair the public health and economic damage from the pandemic?
I think the first step is going in and actually talking to business owners and seeing exactly what their wants and needs are. I've already started doing that as a part of my campaign. And I believe that it's important that if we establish a line of communication between small businesses across Evanston and local government, then businesses that are looking to come to Evanston to expand their reach will recognize that there's a local government that is working for those businesses, that their problems and their needs are being met. And that's something that's been lacking here in Evanston in the past 4 years. And that has to be the chief complaint of a lot of small businesses. So I think that's the first step that needs to be taken. The second is coming up with new, fresh ideas about how to spur economic development. Throwing money at a problem is not always the answer. So it's up to the individual in the office of mayor to come up with those new ideas. And I believe that person is me. One of the ideas that we've come up with is closing the downtown area on Sherman Street to allow small businesses to come out during the summer months and just have individuals come from all over Evanston, come in, shop, go to restaurants, and just spend time outdoors with the community. So there are ideas like that that will be detrimental to the success for small businesses in Evanston.
Thank you. Candidate Bitts, same question.
First of all, our goal here needs to be to come back both stronger and more equitable from this terrible pandemic. And I would divide the answer into three parts. There's the physical health, there's the social consequences of isolation, and there's the economic recovery. When it comes to physical health, first of all, we need to be as aggressive and transparent as possible about the distribution of the vaccine. As you know, there are many people in our community who are concerned about confusion about who's eligible when and how will we get access to the vaccine we need. So we need a government to be as clear and transparent and, like I said, swift as possible in the distribution of that vaccine, because that, of course, will accelerate the recovery. Next, I think we need to acknowledge that there's a very serious human and social cost to this isolation. We have older adults who have been living in total isolation, children who have been doing school from home, and there's a real cost to that. And so we need to come together as a community and work hard and intentionally to create as many opportunities for people to be together in person and re-strengthen those community bonds. Finally, we have to come back economically stronger than before. Part of that's going to mean taking advantage of the new shifts in business patterns and using the advantages that Evanston real estate has to capitalize on some of those changes. Part of that means supporting our small businesses in partnership with the federal government, which will be a critical element in enabling our small businesses to get through it. And part of that is coming together as a community to make sure that we're shopping local to ensure that we keep these jobs here.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
Hi, thanks for the question. So as a small business owner myself, this is a really important question to me. Not only do I run my own small business in Evanston, but I've also opened restaurants and beverage companies. I work with one of the city's largest employers. I work in also the senior housing area, so I understand what COVID has done to our older adult population, but it has also really disenfranchised and really disaffected the Black and Brown population here in Evanston too. Very, like, a disproportionate number have been impacted by it. So on both of those sides, I think it's really going to be important that we come together and try to find solutions. I've been very encouraged that small business owners have reached out to me and said, wow, your message is really ringing true for me. As a small business owner, it sounds like you understand what we're up against. Also within the senior housing, that sector, and again, within this marginalized community. So I would really look to what I've done already in town. I think we're up against some really tough challenges. We're one of 4 or 5 places in the state that's even distributing vaccinations. So I think we need to help our older adults and prioritize Evanston residents on these decisions and help them get the help they need so that we can all get back to work and back to school. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Candidate Bish, you're going to be first to answer the next question, which is related to the last one. After the pandemic fades, how will you work with city staff and city council in the longer term to promote economic development in Evanston?
Yes, it is closely related. And part of it is absolutely to understand that I don't think we're going to go back to the way we were before this pandemic in terms of the patterns of where people work and how people work. And in my opinion, that creates an enormous opportunity for Evanston, as, for example, businesses that are used to thinking that all their employers have to be in the loop every day from 9 to 5 will start to rethink options. I think we've got a huge opportunity. We have to seize that opportunity quickly and aggressively as the vaccine is more broadly spread. So that's part of it. Part of it is to be very clear and strategic about the way we use our extremely limited economic development dollars. I think we've been perhaps more haphazard than we ought to be about that. And part of that, and this is really critical, is doing workforce development work with Oakton Community College and the Youth Jobs Center and the other nonprofits that are already doing that work in town, together with the businesses in town. We have a real opportunity. And I think Oakton is an especially important piece of this puzzle. You know, the city is a significant part of the Oakton Community College District. In fact, we're the biggest property tax contributor to that district. And yet, because the schools themselves are somewhat west of here, we've often felt disconnected from it. And now we have a Oakton Community College board with some Evanstonians on it and really strong people on it who want to be directly engaged with Evanston youth. And I think that's going to be an important part of generating economic opportunity and economic development in this community.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
Well, this is a really important question. I think for too long, and I've spoken out about this for years at City Council as well, and in budget hearings and in planning and development, I think that Evanston has hung its hat on the idea that if we build and develop our downtown, it's sort of a one-trick pony for economic development, and that hasn't worked. Historically, that hasn't worked. So I think, again, we need to go, I'm a member of an organization called Strong Towns. I'm also part of the Better Government Association. I think we need to be looking at other models that are doing this already and let them help us with some of the bright ideas that they're using. I would really like to look to Northwestern to be able to contribute, not just dollars, but also their brain power. They, look at their planning people. Let's let them come to the table with some new ideas. There's another initiative called the Health Action Network, and they look at place-based investing. So let's look at North Shore University. Would they like to be involved in something like that? I don't think that we can continue to solve old problems and post-pandemic to be able to use those initiatives. We need to think creatively and think outside of the box and bring some new fresh blood and new ideas to council. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
So one of the problems that Evanston has had over the years is that we have this kick the can down the road mantra, that we are just deferring year after year and pushing off our problems into the next fiscal year. So first, I would say it's important that we develop our youth, like candidate Biss mentioned in his answer, that we start throughout high school. We're promoting programs through the city and working with District 65 and 202 to provide meaningful curriculum for youth growing up, and as well as providing young adult transitional programs. So we are preparing youth as they grow older to be able to transition into the real world, whether that's to find a career pathway, the social aspect of transitioning, networking and leadership, etc. So those are integral parts of the overarching economic development plan that would need to be developed alongside the city manager. The problem with the way we've been budgeting is that we have lacked direction in terms of an economic development plan. And I believe an institution of such a plan would be beneficial to the overall fiscal health of Evanston. We have a roadmap going forward on how we should spend our dollars on climate change, racial equity, and various other policies. We can begin to responsibly and grow our economics in Evanston.
Thank you. The next question will go first to candidate Keenan. What will you do as chair of the City Council to make meetings more productive and collaborative and shorter?
Well, I joke that as mayor, I probably wouldn't attend any fewer city council meetings than I already do. So I understand the length of these meetings and the burden that they can present in some ways. But I also know from the citizen side, I've been a minute at a time trying to speak truth to power. And I don't think that it should take thousands of residents, hundreds of hours of meetings to have our voice heard. I would certainly start by separating out citizen comment from public comment, because I think when people are luxury developers, they shouldn't have the same time at the mic or should somehow be differentiated from citizen comment. I think as mayor, I would set the tone for the council and I would really try to lead them in a way that is productive. I'd encourage for many of these conversations within the community to be had ahead of time. I don't think that the first time we should be hearing from citizens is at the microphone when there's no true interchange. It's just questions that remain unanswered. So I would certainly start there. I think that we can certainly, I would really urge the aldermen to be having very regular ward meetings. I would encourage them to speak to, everyone from our older population to our youth and everyone in between, to try to be sure that everyone is being included at the table and all voices are heard even before they get to council chambers on a Monday night.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
As I mentioned in my previous answer, when it comes to town hall meetings on a weekly basis, I think that in and of itself alleviates some of the pressure where we see individuals coming in for public comment, and it allows for discussions to take place outside of city council. And I believe that that's a big step in shortening city council meetings and making them more efficient. That even though being mayor and being alderman is a part-time job, there's a lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes and outside of the civic center. So that's where the mayor's office comes in, because the mayor lacks a lot of the formal powers. So it's up to the mayor to go through and advocate for certain positions, and as well as collaborate with aldermen. And I think that's what sets me apart from the other two candidates, is that I have the time to actually do that. As a student, my schedule is extremely flexible, and being able to collaborate with city staff and as well as elected officials can help us go through programs, policies, and new ordinances in a rate that we haven't seen before. And I think we also have to pay more attention to our commissions, boards, and committees. Listen to their findings because they're experts in their field. So when they have a finding that they believe is solid, we work on that, and we take their information that they provide us and apply it.
Thank you. Candidate This.
Yeah, I look at the city council meetings that we've had, and there's been a lot of dysfunction, frankly. There's been a lot of acrimony. There have been people dug in on different sides, fighting with each other. And I think as mayor, the first job is to change that tone. One thing that I think is really interesting in the current city council that didn't always used to be is that there's really factions. And if there's a vote that's 6-3 or 7-2 in the city council, we could all tell you who are the 6 and who are the 3, or who are the 7 and who are the 2, without even knowing the subject matter. What's important, instead of allowing these kinds of longstanding divisions to persist, is to work with everybody and to find common ground with every member of the city council on different issues. And when I work on transforming our mechanism of policing, I'm sure there'll be a particular group of 6 or 7 aldermen I can work with. And when I'm working on affordable housing, there might be a different group of 6 or 7 aldermen I can work with. But I think we need to make sure that we're all finding our areas of common ground and coming together around those areas to move forward. I'm proud to have the support of 7 of the 9 members of council. And I think that speaks to my ability to do that work. Because in fact, if you look at who's supporting me, it includes folks who never really agree about almost anything, except they think that I'm the right person to be the mayor. And I think that indicates that there's room to bring some of these folks together if we approach them in a new way. And if we understand that by understanding one another's points of view, we can actually move forward together.
Thank you. The next question will go first to candidate Knowles, and this is on affordable housing. There's strong consensus to increase affordable housing in Evanston. What concrete proposals do you support to achieve more affordable units?
So first, we need to make sure that we aren't falling prey to developers who promise affordable units in exchange for development rights of luxury building. And we saw that as recently as over 1900 Sherman with that development project. The project changed over time without community input. And it resulted in a lot of distrust between the community and local government. So I think when looking at affordable housing, one, we have to be concrete about our affordable housing plan going forward. And we have to establish trust between community members and members of council. So I believe that we should enlist the help of many individuals in Evanston who are affordable housing experts. Gail Schechter is an individual who I've spent a lot of time with, and she has been amazing with some of her affordable housing plans. And we can turn to communities such as Northbrook, where they established a community land trust to hold low-cost units in perpetuity. So that's just one thing that we can do to increase affordable housing here in Evanston. And it's important that we lay out a cohesive affordable housing plan going forward, working with those experts, working with local advocacy groups who have been fighting for affordable housing, in creating a plan that we can implement and follow going forward into the future.
Thank you. Candidate Biss.
We have a real affordable housing problem in this city, and it's fundamental to who we are. And I think it's important to name the different facets of it because they're all distinct and they all require different solutions. We have a problem where middle income working households are at risk of being pushed out of this community. We have a problem for households living in deep poverty to be able to afford to be here, especially near transportation, which is what enables them to get to work. We have a problem of segregation in this community and a problem of affordability for older adults and a problem of affordability for families with children. And all of these different problems require different steps. I would ask people to go to my website, danielbiss.com/housing. We put out a detailed multi-pronged plan for what to do about this problem, but I want to name a few highlights. First of all, we have an inclusionary housing ordinance on the books today that obligates developers to create a certain number of affordable units, but that needs to be improved. First of all, to increase the number of units available that are affordable for households under 50% of the area median income, but also to increase the fee that developers have to pay into our affordable housing fund so we have the resources to make the difference. We need to take a comprehensive look at our zoning code from the point of view of racial equity and the point of view of affordability, and rethink the exclusionary zoning that's made it so hard to develop more affordable units. And finally, we have to partner with the federal government to bring in resources for the outside to enhance affordability across our community.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
Thanks for the question. So I recently attended an anti-racism workshop on Martin Luther King weekend, and one of the breakout sessions was led by the woman that Sebastian mentioned. And she's been working in the area of affordable housing in Evanston for literally decades. And some of the solutions are right in front of us, but we can't keep coming up with solutions that are just having luxury developers pay into a fund. We need true affordable housing, and not just for mixed race, but for mixed income as well. We're enhanced by our diversity, but when we're losing a socioeconomic diversity, we're also pricing other, generations of families that have been in town are being priced out of town. So when we look at affordable housing, we need to do it with a model like what Northbrook is using, or what Wilmette used in adaptive reuse of the Mallinckrodt. We need to be more creative about the way we approach things, because right now in the development on Sherman, I spoke up in favor of the older adults who lived in the building next door who were pleading to not have that development go through. That development went from 70% affordable to flip to 30% affordable and 70% luxury units. A $1,700 a month studio apartment, 500 square feet, does not help an Evanston family stay in town. So I would try to find solutions that help our family and develop our community in a way that's positive.
Thank you. The next question goes first to candidate Biss, and it's on climate change. What actions would you take as mayor to advance climate action in Evanston? What organizations would be effective allies?
Ooh, I love the second part of the question. It's really, really well posed. We have an opportunity to be a leader on this issue, and boy, should we grab hold of it. The Climate Action and Resilience Plan, or CARP as it's called for some reason, is something that was enacted in Evanston more than 2 years ago now, and it's got a lot of important climate goals. Now we actually have to do the work of achieving those goals, and it will not be easy. It will require dramatic change in our building code, in our zoning code, in the way we approach transportation, in the way we handle waste, in the way we handle green infrastructure, and more. Again, I would ask folks to go to my website, danielbiss.com/climate, if you want to see a long kind of detailed list of ideas. But your question, I think, really hits the nail on the head here. Our climate goals are ambitious enough that we're not going to be able to do it by ourselves. It's going to have to be done in partnership. And we are blessed in this community to have an enormous number of organizations on the grassroots level, and community leaders and academics and thinkers on this topic. So we got to bring all of them together and have this be a communal team effort. But know this too, we have to make sure we're listening to everybody. And if I may say, the community of people engaged in environmental issues has been disappointingly white over the years. And that means that the solutions that they up with are not solutions for the whole community. So we have to devise a mechanism to listen to everybody, bring everybody to the table, and then collectively design the solutions that'll achieve those goals on climate and be equitable.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
Well, I would start by relying on some of what I've done in my professional work. Through LEED certification, I worked with the nation's largest roofing contractor that put a green roof on the Target Center in Minneapolis, which would be like putting a green roof on the United Center. And I would start there. I would look to our buildings and our downtown. I want to protect our built and our natural environment. I think that the places and ways that we can reach out to our community, there are a number of environmental organizations in town, and I think that they're committed to this. I think our CARP, the Climate Action Resilience Plan, is probably outdated and needs to be revisited, but more importantly, it needs to be implemented. We need to be looking at really having some very strong goals. And I think that what we're trying to do right now isn't ambitious enough. I think that the sustainability coordinator for the city might have his hands full in trying to manage so much of this. So I would certainly look to many of the not-for-profit organizations in town to do this, but also look to our built environment and some of the things that we're doing to our downtown. The greenest building is the one already built. So when we are decimating block after block of our downtown and historic buildings, that is not green. So we need to be approaching some of these sort of overarching principles in a way that is truly green and not just green lip service.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
The Climate Action and Resilience Plan is a great stepping stone, and I want to give thanks to the individuals who put that together. And it is old now, so the dates need to be updated, such as our carbon emissions and our green footprint needs to be updated in order to coincide with some of the new findings of scientists around the globe. But it's also important that we include equity when we talk about climate action and intersectionality. So those are some of the changes that need to be made to the Climate Action and Resilience Plan. And then we actually need to go forth and set up an implementation plan. And I think we start by actually funding or fully funding the Office of Sustainability. Kumar Jensen is the coordinator, and I believe that he's the only hired person in that entire office. So giving him the tools and resources needed to push forward in combating climate change is definitely a step in the right direction. And coordinating with local advocacy groups. Citizens for Greener Evanston, E-Town Sunrise, Sierra Club of Illinois are all organizations that we can work with to work on community engagement and policies that can be put into implementation here in Evanston so we can combat climate change together.
Thank you. The next question goes first to candidate Keenan. Do you support efforts to restructure the 9/11 emergency response system? And what is your vision for a transformed system?
I'm sorry, what was the last part of the question?
What is your vision for a transformed system, assuming it will be transformed?
Okay, so the 9/11 system, I think it works for what we need it to do right now. But I think like so many things, it needs to evolve and it needs to be impacted by some of what's happened, even in our culture over the past year. We also have a 311 system in Evanston. We were one of the first communities in the nation to have a 311 system. I think that like so many of these issues in town, we need to differentiate when one is needed and the other is sort of performative. So I would start by, in so many ways, really in Evanston, I would start with an audit of the system, see what the calls are, recognize what the metrics are, and try to look at that with some community input about how we could do it better.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
So I touched on a lot of this in our police reform plan. And one of the steps of police reform and reallocation of funding in the Evanston Police Department is looking at our 911 dispatch system and implementing an alternative emergency system. we would model that alternative emergency system out after the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon. And in Eugene, Oregon, I believe they took about 17% of the overall call base going into 911 and saved the city about $8.5 million in its first 4 years from 2017 to 2021. So it's important to note that this is a moral right and a fiscally responsible action to take, that we can be saving lives by having individuals and emergency response teams come out that are qualified to deal with behavioral issues as well as mental health issues. We want to take the burden away from the Evanston Police Department, that they can focus on the jobs that they need to do and they've been trained to do. Leave the hardworking mental health crises and behavioral issues to specialists that are in that field, so that we can overall be a more healthy and safer community.
Thank you. Candidate Bitts.
This is a really important opportunity for our community. A police officer is a very, very special kind of city worker. They're the only city worker who shows up with a gun, who shows up with a badge, who has handcuffs and the power to take away your liberty and put you under arrest and put you in a cage. And that those powers are unfortunately absolutely necessary, in my opinion, in some circumstances. However, they're very specialized powers and they're not the best way to address a lot of other challenges. And so what we need to do is to have a comprehensive community-wide discussion about all the different calls that come into the 911 system and ask ourselves, of those calls, what are the problems that are best solved with the highly specialized powers and skill sets that a police officer brings? What are the ones, like, for example, many mental health crises, that are best solved by a completely different set of services, for instance, mental health service providers? And then what are the intermediate category of problems that are best served with a co-response model, let's say, of a police officer and a mental health worker coming together to address a mental health crisis that someone who might be at risk of hurting themselves or others is undergoing. And then once you've done that, you build up the capacity to for all these other service providers to address these problems. And then you have to train up the 911 intake folks to make sure they have a completely clear understanding of which calls to deflect where. If you have done all this, the outcome will be a higher quality of public safety at a lower cost in a more just way.
Thank you. The next question goes first to candidate Knowles. After Evanston began to implement a reparations program focusing on assisting Black residents acquire housing, what goals should reparations support, and how should eligibility be defined?
I think I come from a unique position because I am one Black resident in Evanston. And I've spent a lot of time in the Fifth Ward talking to residents, small business owners, about the impacts of the reparations programs, what's beneficial and what's not. And I think that's the first step in this whole conversation, is talking to residents and seeing how this program is seen by them. We've seen that with the reparations program, how it currently works is that there's homeowners assistance, mortgage assistance, and home renovations assistance that the city can offer. But for many residents who have been longtime residents of Evanston, their homes are paid off, or they're in senior living and they don't own a home, or they rent. So providing more options for qualified individuals to actually take the reparations and apply it as they will. Going in and seeing whether entrepreneurship grants would be something that community members would like to see, rental assistance, or even direct stipends from the city. So I think those are ways that we can expand the program and get back to actually listening to community members so that we have a real reparations program. I do want to say that since Evanston's reparations program was one of the first in the nation, it's extremely beneficial, but there's still a lot of work we need to do with the program and expanding it and making it more equitable for residents.
Thank you. Candidate Biss.
Thank you. I think we ought to be very proud of the leading role that we're playing in this discussion. And I'm proud to have the support of Alderman Robin Rue Simmons, who is the lead sponsor of the Reparations Act, because she sees me as the right mayor to help make sure this thing is implemented successfully and grows over time. So here's how I think about where we are and where we need to go. The reparations program as it's designed so far, I think is very logical. It says, hey, listen, the war on drugs was racist. And so now that cannabis is legalized for recreational use, we ought to take the tax revenue from that and repair some of the harm done by the war on drugs. And then it says, hey, the city, which was heavily involved in enforcing and continuing segregation in Evanston, has played a role specifically in harming Black families in Evanston through housing policy, and therefore a natural place to put those resources to work in repairing the harm is around the question of home ownership. I think that's all logical and appropriate, and it's so far as it goes. But the bad news is that the war on drugs isn't the end of the conversation about what were racist institutions in Evanston, and housing inequities isn't the end of the conversation about what were the consequences of racism in Evanston. And so over time, I think we have to expand it and look at other institutions, whether that be financial institutions that were involved in redlining or hospitals or Northwestern that exacerbated institutional racism, and look to them for resources and then use those resources to solve other problems that have been an outcome of these awful acts.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
Well, so just this week, I attended 2 different meetings where reparations came up. One was actually the reparations subcommittee meeting, and one was the 6th and 7th ward meeting. It was a combined ward meeting on Thursday night. In those 2 meetings, the reparations subcommittee, we learned a lot about how this is going. And I would congratulate Evanston and Robin Ruth Simmons and the council, in fact, for the work they've done in introducing reparations. I think it's great, but because we're first and because we're pioneers, we're not always going to get it right. So it's a good start. But I think that what's going on right now, and Renee and Tina Payton, who their mother was an alderman, a former alderman, they've started a petition saying that what the city is offering as reparations isn't true reparations. And the petition, really, reparations should not have strings attached. So we can't say, if you were going to get your stimulus check, the government can't say, yeah, but you can only spend it on X. So we need to look at what true reparations are and look at a national model for this, and look to the community members like Renee and Tina Payton, who have been doing affordable housing for generations in town, and listen to them when they have input about what true reparations could be. I think it's a great start. I think we're on the path to victory here, and I think that we're going to be a model for many other communities. So we really need to get it right. And I think that we're starting, but I think we need more community input.
Thank you. The next question will go first to candidate Biss. Do you think the city should sell some of its assets? Which ones? And how should the resulting revenue be used?
Well, I certainly don't have a plan to sell city assets. I think we have to address this question at a one at a time situation. And, I think it's probably no secret the city asset that we are most often asked about in this campaign, because there's a lot of chatter in town, is the Civic Center. And people ask me, should we sell the Civic Center? And I say, I love the Civic Center as it is, but I'm not going to be able to give an opinion on this question until we see what the alternative is, until we see what would be done with that property if it were sold, and where the city seat of government would move to. And I think that's the approach that we ought to take to this question every time, that if we're willing to, if we're going to consider selling a public asset, which means taking something which is currently owned by the whole public and utilized to the benefit of the whole public, and then privatizing it for some purpose, we better do that for a good reason, and with an understanding that we're not likely to get that asset back on the public rolls for a long period of time. So look, history goes on forever. There's no infinite permanence to anything. We have to be open to these options, but I think we have to be very, very careful about understanding that the loss that comes with privatization of a city asset is a loss that goes on in perpetuity. And I think there are certain types of city assets that we need to be especially protective of, right? I think our lakefront is a sacred trust that we have with the future generations of Evanstonians and people in the surrounding areas. And that's not the place where I would be open to privatization.
Thank you. Candidate Keenan.
So I know right now there is actually a list of our assets that was done an assessment, and I know that the Civic Center was assessed at $14 million. I also know that years ago, community members put together a referendum, which takes a lot of work, I can tell you firsthand, and put it on the ballot. And the citizens of Evanston said, we want to keep the Civic Center. What I think happens in Evanston, it feels a little bit binary. We're either going to sell it or we're going to keep it. But could we come up with a public-private or partnership where we could maybe keep the Civic Center and do work with Landmarks Illinois for adaptive reuse? Maybe we would use the first and second floor. Granted, maybe we don't need all of that space, but it's in the 5th Ward. We should keep it centrally located. It's got free parking, which means access for everyone. We don't need a TIF, which is being proposed right now by this council, which is on its way out. A TIF over a $14 million property means that any development money that would go into that would be funneled to the developer as a blighted area. So I think on a case-by-case basis, you know, I've fought to save Chandler Newberger and Noyes Cultural Center and Harley Clark. And, you know, now we'll be talking about the Civic Center. So I think that this takes a lot of community activism, but I think we need to listen to the community. And I think we need to be more creative in the ways that we approach these types of assets. It is an asset and it's public and it should belong to all of us. So I don't think these decisions should be made haphazardly.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
I think that I come from an interesting position because I have worked in the city of Evanston, whether that's the Parks and Recreation Department, working with individuals in the Streets and Sanitation Department. So there are definitely small assets in Evanston that can be looked at in a department by department basis and seeing if they would necessarily be needed in Evanston going forward, whether those are certain vehicles and different aspects of different programs. But when we look at major assets that the city holds, like the Civic Center, like the various community centers, we need to first look at other options we have on the table in terms of what will we do with that area once it is given up from the public, and if that's something that Evanston residents would like to see. An example of such that I see on almost a daily basis is the old recycling center on Oakton, that it's been laid open as a storage center essentially for the past 10 years since its closing. And there are assets like that the city has that we could look at and say, okay, what else could we make this into? And how could this be developed? But ultimately, this is a decision that should lay on the hands of residents when it comes to large assets in the form of a referendum or just public input. It's not up to the city council to decide what happens to the Civic Center or some communities.
Thank
It's up to the public.
Thank you. The next question will go first to candidate Keenan, and this will be the last question. How can the city develop a balanced budget without raising property taxes? What new revenue or spending cuts would you support?
Well, again, I go back to, I've participated in citizen comment for the budget review process for the last 20 years that I've lived here. And I think that there are line items that are really frivolous for our community. And I think that what we need right now is a forensic audit of the city's budget, which hasn't been done in the past. I would certainly look to capitalize on the benefits that we have within our community, our diversity. I would look to develop sort of investment in entrepreneurship, as candidate Knowles, but also in Black businesses too. Can we look at stopping, we've got frivolous lawsuits that the city pursues. Can we look at thinking creatively in terms of public-private partnership? I think anytime we're just looking to developers to build in our downtown for an economic engine, that that's not going to improve our downtown. What's going to happen is we're putting people out of the downtown that aren't interested in going there any longer. So I think in terms of economic development, I would look to our businesses, I would look to our strengths, I would look to our creative class. What can we be doing? We've got such a strong creative base in Evanston. Let's invest in them. Let's invest in Black businesses. Let's invest in ways that we haven't traditionally or historically done in Evanston. And let's do it creatively together.
Thank you. Candidate Knowles.
I think it starts by going through the budget and performing that forensic audit and seeing exactly where we can cut some of the meat out of the budget. And when working in the city of Evanston, I did notice that some programs were overfunded or some salaries did not fit the job. that was being offered. So it's definitely important that we go through on a department by department basis and see where money can be saved without destroying any quality of service. And then to generate new revenue from the city, I would look no further to Northwestern and having them contribute more to the local economy. Seeing what their current contributions are now compared to the lost property tax revenue of all their properties, finding the difference between the two and recognizing that, okay, this is where our negotiating price should be of how much you should contribute to the community, whether that's in the form of a monetary payment or programs that'll directly benefit Evanston residents so that they no longer have to solely shoulder the burden of budgeting and fiscal responsibility here in Evanston.
Thank you. Candidate Biss.
Thanks. I would divide the answer to this question into three parts. There's revenue, there's spending, and there's growth. When it comes to revenue, I think we have to acknowledge that the state of Illinois has tied our hands more than we would like, and it's difficult to find fair ways to bring in revenue based upon ability to pay. I should, since we're here at a forum co-sponsored by the League, I should say that the fair tax that tragically failed last November, that the League has been fighting for decades, would have been an important improvement in this regard, and I'm heartbroken about that after putting a lot of energy into passing it. But we have to look for other creative ways to bring in revenue that actually asks those with the ability to pay, including renegotiating some of our arrangements with Northwestern. When it comes to spending, I think the honest answer is that we have seen so many repeated cuts that there isn't a lot of fat left in the city budget. And I don't think we should fool ourselves into thinking there is, but there are opportunities to restructure the way we do some of what the city does in ways that actually would be better for our community and less expensive. And I do believe that a key example of that is in the re-envisioning of our public safety mechanisms, which again, would create more justice, more equity, more safety, and would be better for the city's bottom line. Finally, we have to think creatively about economic development. We have to look again to Oakton Community College and youth development. We have to invest in our local small businesses while lifting up entrepreneurs from communities who have been locked out of the ability to make progress. And we have to understand that if we have a more vibrant business community and a more dense population, that will be enormously beneficial to our city's bottom line as well.
Thank you. Now we will start with concluding statements. Candidate Knowles will go first, and you have 90 seconds.
I do want to say thank you again for the League and the Public Library for putting this event together. And thank you everyone for watching. It's been a pleasure answering your questions. And if you have any more questions, you can visit my website at sebastianknowles.com and submit them there, and look at any past forums that we've had and tune in and listen to the upcoming debate on February 2nd. We touched on many issues this afternoon, and there are so many more that need to be covered in Evanston. And it's important that we have the next generation of leaders stepping up to the plate and taking on the challenge to making Evanston brighter for the future to come. And I can pledge here and now to spending the next 10 to 15 years, at the very least, advocating for the concerns of residents here in Evanston. And I look forward to serving the community in any capacity that I can possibly help in, because I care about the community day in and day out. I'm a member of it. I've always lived here, and I will continue to serve. Thank you so much. Our primary is on February 23rd. Early voting starts February 8th. You can now start applying for mail-in ballots. And I look forward to meeting you all in some way, form, or another in the coming future. Thank you again, and have a good rest of your weekend.
Thank you, Candidate Keenan.
First of all, thank you again to the League and the library and everyone who was instrumental in all of the technical behind the scenes. We certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak to the residents of Evanston, and the League's been an important voice for that for years. I would say, as in my closing remarks, I would really look to who has the Evanston experience, who has been doing this for 20 years, and who has really built a broad base of support across every ward in town in improving our community right here at home as a volunteer, not as a politician and not as a paid entity, but really just to step up because I'm trying to make our community better. I am looking for your vote. We've got a primary election and then a consolidated election. I look for really support from the community that I have helped to support over the years. So as you consider the candidates, I would ask you to consider who's been doing this, who's been in the trenches alongside of the volunteers in Evanston for 20 years. And who can commit to doing this in the future. This isn't going, I don't want to be the mayor, I want to be your mayor, and I'm asking for your vote. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Candidate Biss.
Well, thank you. I think this was a really good discussion. I appreciated the opportunity and of course appreciate the work that the League and the library do for so many important causes. And I have to tell you, I think we saw, I would respectfully suggest we saw 3 good candidates with relatively aligned visions and a passion to do a lot for this city, a passion to do dramatic, bold things to move us in a new direction and really transform the way we deliver services and think about public policy. And what I would respectfully ask is that you look at the question as you're contemplating who to vote for of who is best positioned to get it done. For example, we all talked about bold agendas on the question of climate, but I was proud to have the endorsement of the Sierra Club who said, hey, listen, all 3 candidates are good, but we have seen Daniel get it done, and so we're for him. We've talked about bold agendas on racial justice, but I'm proud to have the endorsement of OPAL, the Organization for Positive Action and Leadership, because they said, again, this is somebody who we trust to get it done. We have a lot of challenge in front of us, and if we're going to achieve a lot of what we've discussed this afternoon, it's going to be controversial and difficult, and I'm proud of the record that I've established, bringing people together and building coalitions to achieve difficult things. I think that's why I have so much support from across the community, not only 7 members of council, but Congresswoman Schakowsky, our state delegation, and hundreds of other people who you can see on our website. I'm asking you to join them so we can transform Evanston moving forward. Thank you very much for your consideration.
Thank you. And that concludes our forum. Thank you to the candidates, the League, and the Evanston Library. This forum will be on the League website, lwbe.org, by tomorrow, and on their YouTube channel. And as candidate Null said, the election is February 23rd, and early voting starts February 8th. Happy voting, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.